You spent good money on a rod, a quality reel, and the right lures for the conditions, and then you spooled up with whatever braid was on sale that week because you figured line is line. And maybe it worked fine for a while, but then you started noticing that your casts were falling a little short. The line was making more noise through the guides. A knot slipped under load. The color bled out after 2 trips and left you with some brownish ghost of whatever it was supposed to be. That is when you started wondering whether cheap braid is actually saving you anything or whether it is quietly costing you fish. Hit subscribe before we get into it, because this channel is about honest gear advice. And braided line is one of those topics where the marketing gets loud and the real differences can be easy to miss if nobody breaks them down for you. I'm Jerry Davis, and I've spent enough time around rods, reels, tackle shops, and anglers of all experience levels to know that braided line is one of the most misunderstood purchases in fishing. People will agonize over which rod blank to buy, but throw any braid on the spool without a second thought. And because line failures are not always dramatic, many anglers never connect what they lost to the line they were running. So today, we are comparing budget braid against premium braid under real fishing pressure. Not store conditions, not spool feel tests. We are talking about what holds up when you are burning a topwater over grass, grinding a swim bait through rock, pitching into brush piles, or fighting something heavy in current. I am going to walk you through the specific differences that matter, where the cheaper options hold their own, and where the price gap is actually worth paying. By the end, you will know exactly how to decide which braid belongs on which rod for the kind of fishing you actually do. Let's start with what braid is and why the construction differences between cheap and premium options matter more than most people think. Braided line is made from woven synthetic fibers, most commonly Dyneema or Spectra, which are high modulus polyethylene materials. The core question is not just the raw fiber, but how many strands are woven together and how tightly and consistently that weave is executed. You will typically see 4-strand and 8-strand braids, and that distinction matters for reasons we will get into. But even within those categories, you can have very different products at very different price points. And the difference shows up in ways that are not always obvious until you are actually fishing. The argument for budget braid is straightforward. You are using the same class of fiber, you are getting similar break strengths on paper, and you are spending maybe a third or a quarter of what premium options cost. For someone spooling multiple rods, that adds up fast. A spool of Cast King Superpower or Reaction Tackle Braid runs a fraction of what you pay for Sufix 832 or PowerPro Spectra. If the line does the same job, the math makes sense. And here is the honest part. For certain applications, budget braid does do a comparable job. If you are bass fishing in relatively open water, doing mostly moderate retrieves with moving baits, and you are changing your line at least once a season, a well-reviewed budget braid can give you adequate performance without the premium cost. This is not a situation where every cheap product is garbage. Some budget braids have developed real followings among anglers who fish them hard and report acceptable longevity and strength consistency. But here is where the differences start to show up in ways that affect actual fishing. The first one is diameter accuracy. Most braided lines are rated by pound test, and they include a diameter on the packaging. The problem with a number of budget braids is that the actual diameter can run noticeably larger than advertised. This matters because a thicker line takes up more spool space, cuts through water differently, and creates more drag on the cast. When you are looking at a budget braid rated at 30-pound test, but with a diameter closer to a premium 40-pound line, you are getting less castability, less capacity, and more wind resistance with every throw. Anglers consistently report this issue across multiple budget brands, and it is worth checking reviews carefully before you spool up. Premium options, like Sufix 832 and Shimano PowerPro, are generally tighter to their labeled diameters because the manufacturing tolerances are held more closely. That consistency is one of the things you are paying for, even if it sounds like a technical detail. The second difference is surface texture and how the line behaves on the cast. A tightly woven, well-finished braid comes off a spinning reel spool with minimal resistance and travels through the guides smoothly. A looser or rougher weave creates friction, which shortens your cast and can cause the line to make a distinct buzzing or cutting sound through the guides. That sound is not just annoying. It tells you that the line is wearing more quickly against the guide surfaces, and it tells you that you are losing energy on every cast. On a bait caster, it is slightly less of an issue, but on a spinning setup, it matters a lot, especially for finesse work where you are throwing lightweight rigs or small, soft plastics at distance. 8-strand braid is rounder in cross-section than 4-strand because more strands fill more of the gaps in the weave. A rounder line flows through guides more cleanly, casts better, and lies more evenly on the spool. Budget braid typically uses 4 strands, though there are exceptions. Premium 8-strand options, like Sufix 832 and Seaguar Smackdown, are noticeably smoother and quieter. And that smoothness has real fishing consequences when you are relying on casting distance or working a bait through heavy cover at varying retrieve speeds. That said, 4-strand braid is not useless. It tends to be tougher against abrasion than 8-strand because the thicker individual strands offer more resistance to being cut or frayed. So, the choice between 4 and 8-strand is not just a budget issue. It is a technique issue too. Let's talk about knot strength, because this is where budget braid can create problems that anglers do not always trace back to the line. Braid does not stretch, and that means knot integrity is critically important. The fibers in lower quality braid can be less consistent in their surface finish, which affects how well knots seat and hold under sudden load. A Palomar knot in a premium 8-strand braid typically tests very close to the line's rated break strength. In some budget braids, that same knot under the same conditions will test noticeably lower, or worse, it will hold fine at steady pressure, but slip or break at sudden impact. That matters when you set a hook hard on a fish near cover, or when a good bass makes a fast run and changes direction. Anglers who have switched between budget and premium braid frequently report that knot failures and near failures dropped significantly when they moved to a more consistent line. That is not a marketing story. That is a practical consequence of fiber quality and surface consistency. Now, let me give you the scenario where budget braid genuinely makes sense, because this is not a one-sided comparison. If you are fishing heavy cover with a bait caster, throwing frogs, or punching mats with 65-pound braid, the abrasion resistance of a heavier 4-strand budget option is actually a reasonable match for the job. You are not relying on casting distance or sensitivity. You are pulling fish out of thick cover and relying on brute strength. In that scenario, a well-regarded budget braid at a lower price per yard can make a lot of practical sense. You are going to lose line to cutting and fraying anyway in that kind of fishing, and replacing budget braid more often still costs you less than filling a heavy cover rod with premium line every time. Similarly, if you are using braid as a backing under a fluorocarbon or monofilament top shot, the braid never touches the water and never contacts a guide under load. It just sits on the spool and fills space. Spending premium money on backing is genuinely a waste. Any decent budget braid works fine for that application, and recognizing that can save you real money across multiple reels. Where premium braid earns its price most clearly is in finesse spinning applications, long-range casting situations, light line work, and any fishing where sensitivity is the primary reason you chose braid in the first place. Think about drop shotting in clear water or jigging for walleye at depth. You chose braid because you want to feel every tick, every tap, every change in bottom composition. If the line you are using has inconsistent fiber density or a softer weave that absorbs more water and loses stiffness, you are undermining the exact reason you chose braid over monofilament. Premium 8-strand line stays more consistent, transmits more vibration, and gives you a more reliable connection between your hand and what is happening at the bottom. That is not a small thing when you're trying to detect subtle winter bites at 30 feet of water. Color fading is another real-world difference worth mentioning. Most braids are dyed after weaving, and the quality and permanence of that dye varies considerably. Budget braids often fade quickly, sometimes within a few trips. That creates a practical problem if you are using line color as a depth reference for vertical fishing, or if you just want to be able to see the line clearly for strike detection on topwater presentations. Premium braids generally hold color longer, though no braid holds its color permanently. Moss green and low visibility options tend to hold better than bright yellows and oranges in most brands, but premium lines have a clear edge in color retention overall. Let me address the abrasion question directly, because it comes up constantly when anglers compare cheap and premium options. Abrasion resistance in braid depends heavily on individual fiber diameter and how tightly the weave is constructed. Counterintuitively, heavier 4-strand budget braid can sometimes outperform lighter 8-strand premium braid in raw abrasion tests because the thicker individual strands are harder to nick. But when you factor in the consistency of the protection across the entire length of the spool, premium braid tends to deliver more uniform abrasion resistance. A budget braid that has slight inconsistencies in weave tightness will have weak spots you cannot see, and those are the spots that fail when the line drags across a rock ledge or a submerged log under load. Anglers fishing consistently rocky structure report more random failures with budget braid than with premium options, not because the average strength is dramatically different, but because the variance is higher. Here is a point that does not get discussed enough. The rod guides you are running your braid through affect how the line performs and wears over time. Cheap ceramic guides with microcracks or porous surfaces will damage any line over time, but they damage lower quality braid faster because the line's surface texture creates more friction points. If your rod has bargain guides, running premium braid is partially wasted. Conversely, if you have a quality rod with smooth, well-finished guides, cheap braid with a rougher surface texture will wear against those guides and wear itself out faster. The line and the rod work together, and neither one exists in isolation. For saltwater applications, this comparison takes on a different character entirely. Saltwater fishing puts more sustained pressure on line than most freshwater situations. Between the fish sizes, the current, the structure, and the number of trips per season. Budget braid, in a saltwater environment, often shows its limitations more quickly in terms of color loss, surface degradation, and inconsistency under repeated heavy loads. If you are inshore fishing for redfish or snook, or offshore trolling, the cost difference between budget and premium braid becomes easier to justify, because the cost of a line failure in terms of lost fish, lost tackle, and the frustration involved is higher. For occasional light saltwater outings, budget braid may still serve you adequately, but for regular, serious saltwater use, the premium options tend to hold up better and longer. Ice fishing is another specific case worth calling out. Line behavior changes in cold temperatures, and braid that performs well in warm conditions can become stiffer, more prone to ice buildup, and harder to manage in near-freezing conditions. Some budget braids perform poorly in cold weather in ways that standard reviews do not capture, because most reviews are written in moderate conditions. Anglers who ice fish consistently tend to favor lines specifically designed for cold weather use. And in that niche, choosing by temperature performance matters more than the standard warm water criteria. Now, let's pull this together into something you can actually use at the tackle store or when ordering online. If you fish light spinning tackle for bass, walleye, or panfish, and sensitivity and castability matter, step up to an 8-strand premium braid. The performance difference is noticeable, and the long-term value is better because the line lasts longer and performs more consistently. If you are throwing heavy braid into matted vegetation on a baitcaster, a quality 4-strand budget option at a larger diameter will do the job, and you will not feel bad about burning through it. If you need to fill multiple reels for a variety of applications and budget is a real concern, use budget braid as backing and put premium line on the working section. If you fish saltwater with any regularity, factor durability and consistency into the purchase rather than just the upfront cost. Do not assume that spending 3 times as much on braid automatically makes you a better angler. But also, do not assume that line is line and the price difference is all marketing. The differences are real. They are just specific to technique, application, environment, and how hard you push your equipment. Let me know in the comments which braid you are currently running and what kind of fishing you are doing with it. I am genuinely curious how many people are running the same budget spool across different rods and techniques without adjusting for the application, because that is probably the most common mismatch I hear about. The takeaway here is not that cheap braid is bad and premium braid is worth every penny in every situation. The takeaway is that braid selection should match the technique, the target species, and the conditions the same way rod and reel selection does. A quality budget braid on the right rod for the right technique will outperform a premium braid on the wrong setup every single time. Know what you are fishing for, know the conditions, and match the line to the job. That is how you get more out of every dollar you spend on the water. Hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who is spooling up blind. I'm Jerry Davis, and I'll catch you in the next one.